Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched How to Get Away with Murder season 6, the final season. Let's talk about it. So the time has finally come to put an end to Annalise's story, and this is a very bittersweet ending for me personally. I've been watching this show since season 1. It has a special place in my heart. But whilst it was very sad to see it go, I do think that it was time because there were certain character arcs and certain storylines that were just running around in circles or just not progressing, and that got a bit frustrating. So I do think that season 6 was the perfect time to end things, even though I do wish that they'd had maybe a couple of more episodes to flesh out all of those loose ends so that we could get the perfect ending for each and every one of them. But that unfortunately was not possible. We got what we got. So I'm here to talk about what we did end up with in terms of the final season of this great show. Now this will of course be a spoiler review, but before we get into that, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to my channel so that you can catch new uploads. I'm very happy to have reached 200 subscribers. Thank you to every single one of you who have been subscribing, commenting, liking my videos. I appreciate it so much, and I love talking to you guys in the comment section about all of these TV shows and films. So without further ado, let's jump right into my thoughts on season 6 on How to Get Away with Murder, and at the very end of this review I will be giving my final score for the series as a whole. Now for me, there were two main elements to the last season of this show. Of course, the first one was the trial where Annalise was accused of doing everything. Every single bad thing that ever happened, Annalise was accused of. But notably was the murders of Sam, as well as some other characters whose name escapes me right now. But essentially, she is being accused of being a serial killer by the FBI, who have been building a case against her for a couple of seasons now, as we saw in the previous seasons. And as a result, it's all led up to this major trial which she decides to defend herself in. Now there is a lot at stake here at this trial. In fact, at one point the district attorney even threatened the death penalty, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. Don't even say those words in relation to Annalise, because absolutely not. Thankfully that was brushed away real quick because it had no business being part of the conversation to begin with. But still, there is a lot at stake because of course she would be facing life in prison. And of course, knowing Annalise and knowing how much of a control freak she is, there is no way that she would feel comfortable with someone else representing her in such a crucial trial, even if that person is Tegan, who has been proven to be quite trustworthy because of very obvious reasons, which is revealed at the very end of the series, where she reveals her love for Annalise, which I knew from the get-go. I don't think that was a huge reveal, and I'm not sure that the show thinks it was a huge reveal either. They did dedicate a whole moment to it, but it was a short-lived moment and we got along with the plot, thankfully. But I do still think it's nice that Tegan managed to get that off her chest and finally reveal her full emotions for Annalise and how much she cares about her, even though it was very evident to us as viewers. In the case of the character of Tegan, I think it was a bit of a missed opportunity not to flesh her out a bit more. She didn't really seem like her own person. She was very much a character in proxy to everyone else and everything else that was going on. So for example, when the focus was on Laurel, she was involved in the whole Laurel situation, and when the focus was of course with Annalise and her trial, she just became Annalise's lawyer and kind of crutch. But she never really got any substantial character development to make her stand out as a character in her own right, although I was still a fan of her and I did really like the actress's performance as her. Speaking of performances though, if we're gonna be real, the star of this show is without a doubt Viola Davis and her incredible acting. And of course, the fact that Annalise decides to represent herself in this trial means that we get more of those incredible, memorable courtroom scenes where Viola Davis is just giving us, everything, serving us excellence in acting. Chef's kiss, Michelin 5-star, amazing, especially in the last episode. Are you joking? Are you joking? That scene where she is addressing the jury and she just strips away, as she says, the mask. The mask is off. No more of this illusion of this strong, impenetrable human being. She just becomes so human. She just becomes so relatable and so vulnerable in that moment. And she's able to just communicate everything that she feels, everything that she has ever felt, everything that she has ever been as a character, as this character of Anna May / Annalise / whoever. and it's beautiful. I think Viola Davis, it was like, give me the Emmy. Give me the Emmy now. Let's not waste time. Carve my name on that statue already because it's a done deal. It was a stunning performance throughout the series, of course, but especially during that monologue and the final episode. Are you kidding? And in the end, Annalise is proven right, because if there's one person that knows how to fight in the courtroom and fight for her own life, for her own survival, it is her. And throughout this journey, there were moments where she doubted herself. And I especially liked how in the penultimate episode, we got a chance to get inside of her brain and get into her thought process and how she's feeling at this moment where her life is on the line and she is forced to defend herself. And that's pretty much the only way that she would ever want it to be, because she's that control freak. But at the same time, it's just so much pressure, especially when so much is going wrong surrounding her. And even though the voiceover was a little bit jarring and a little bit different in terms of what we've seen before from the show, I do think it was ultimately a positive, because it allowed us to have a bit more insight into Annalise's mind, especially during this time. Just her being on the brink of giving up, because it seems like everyone is against her. The people that she tried to defend, we'll get to them. We will get to them in a minute. But the people who she tried to defend and protect are against her. Her enemies are out there clawing at her. The whole world seems to be against her at this moment. And when she starts doubting herself, she gets herself into these very scary mental places where she feels like giving up. And ultimately, we do see that the fight was fruitful and she was victorious in her trial. But at what cost? You know, so much was taken out of her by the end of it. And even afterwards, when she'd lost everything, we do see that she ended up living her life until she was old, and she ended up dying of old age, presumably. But it was still very difficult. She still wasn't able to maintain long-lasting romantic relationships. We see that through that montage of her changing hands with so many different people throughout her life. And she wasn't able to fully get over the alcoholism. We see that she's still drinking afterwards. And so we see that even though the story of the trial technically had a happy ending, Annalise's life was never bereft of suffering and of pain. Although we do see at the very end, at her funeral, some very notable people are present, which just goes to show that some people that she was looking out for and tried to protect actually showed up for her when the time came, which adds to the sweetness to this bittersweet ending. But before we get into the mystery of the funeral, which we will, let's get back to the trial itself and talk about some of the characters and the roles that they had to play throughout it. So first of all, let's address the Keating Five, or at least what's left of them. First of all, you have Asher, who ends up dying throughout this season. Now, he is revealed to be a mole for the FBI. He's working alongside them because he's just trying to do the right thing, and everything is crazy and it's all Annalise's fault. It's just one of those people who just insist that Annalise is to blame for everything and refuses to take responsibility for anything that he has done. So Asher did frustrate me at the end, but I do think that his death was somewhat, sad. It was a bit upsetting, and it was really interesting to see the impact of Asher's death on the others, and the fact that they ended up turning against Annalise because the FBI threatened to blame them for the murder. Even though ultimately it turns out that it was one of them who ended up killing Asher because one of their FBI agents was dirty and they were working alongside the Castillos. So that leads to Michaela and Connor becoming FBI informants against Annalise, and this just chilled me to my core. How can Michaela look herself in the mirror after the stuff that she said about Annalise, especially Michaela? Connor was just so down the entire time. He was weighed by the weight of the world, not just this case. Everything wrong in the world was weighing Connor down, and I fully appreciate the fact that this character is such a good representation of what it means to have a mental illness. When all of this nonsense is happening around you, they never really let up the fact that he is depressed. His character is essentially so engulfed by the guilt and by the pain and by the haunting of everything that happened since the night that Sam died, that it has just kind of snowballed into this character becoming a shell of his former self. I do commend the actor for being able to portray this character so well, even if it did make for a difficult character to follow along this journey. But you want to talk about difficult? Michaela, I don't know what planet she's on. She turned into a full-on conniving villain in this series because she just lost all sense of morality. She stopped caring about anything. Moral compass where? Absolutely not. Michaela was just in it for herself this season, and it just irk to me. And in terms of the portrayal of the character, I think obviously that was fantastic. But the character herself, the way that she was written, she was heartless this season. She really did not care about anyone but herself and her own survival. And the fact that in the end, she ends up very successful. She ends up being a judge, and she is not present at Annalise's funeral, notably. But we see that she was actually successful because she shoved everyone out of her way to success. And it just goes to show that sometimes these are the people who end up being successful. And it presents a really interesting discussion at the very last minute, because we know that she's a villain. We know that, first of all, she's the one that killed Sam. If anyone should end up in prison, it's her. We know that. But it just goes to show that sometimes the people who end up successful are the ones who have, skeletons in the closet. And ultimately, Michaela is the perfect representation of that. Everyone who tried to do the right thing, they ended up, we're not really sure what happened to Laurel, but it assumes that she didn't have the most glamorous life afterwards. She probably just, kept low and tried to focus on her and Christopher's survival. But in the case of Michaela, she actually thrived. And there's another side of this argument where we do get to see that Michaela was trying to pave the way forward. We see two black women who are, I guess, becoming lawyers or something. I don't know what was happening there. I can't remember. But she's trying to pave the way forward, and she's trying to increase the diversity within the judicial system in America in the way that she can. So it's kind of like this conflict of, we know that she has skeletons in her closet and she's the one who killed Sam in the first place, but she's trying to do a good thing in the way that she knows how, but she still hasn't paid for the crimes that she committed, and she never will. So it's a very interesting ending for the character of Michaela. And even though it was so frustrating to see her just become this heartless, soulless shell of a human being throughout this season, who was so selfish, I did really find it interesting to see the character journey of this adoptee who was abandoned by her biological parents and then mistreated and abused by her adoptive parents, and she had to crawl her way up to the top by whatever means necessary. And we saw the means that were necessary here, and ultimately she did end up having that success story, but at what cost? In the case of the character of Connor, like I said, it was very much a study of mental health when it comes to him, but it did also mean that his character felt very stagnant, especially throughout the last few seasons of the show. There wasn't very much character development when it came to the character of Connor. There were some very interesting moments in his life and his journey, like his marriage to Oliver, which that almost fell apart completely in the final episode. And that was one of the most emotional moments of the episode, when we see Oliver and Connor just in this absolute anguish over what to do, what is the right thing here, because Oliver just wants to protect his husband by any means necessary. He's going down the Michaela route a little bit, and Oliver is very much the type of character who at first we saw as this moral compass, like he was the good guy, he was the untainted one, untainted by murder. But of course that stuff gets everywhere. It's impossible to wash out. So unfortunately we got some murder gene on Oliver, and he's just trying to make things work, make his marriage work, and just try to see the upside for the sake of his marriage with Connor. But Connor is just seeing him deteriorate and seeing him go down the really dark path, and he knows that he is partially responsible for that, and he feels, again, the guilt of the world on his shoulders. And ultimately he even threatens to divorce Oliver over it, because the idea that Oliver would take the stand and lie and just become this completely different person because of him absolutely destroys him. Now ultimately, because Annalise does win the trial, Connor ends up going to prison for 5 years. I don't know if he serves those full 5 years, maybe he got out on good behavior, but it's a very sad moment when we see Connor getting, handcuffed and taken away, and Oliver is just so distraught. And then Michaela tries to comfort Oliver, and he's just like, get away from me. I completely agreed with that. Like I was so angry when Michaela tried to comfort Oliver. Like, how dare you? You managed to get a better deal for yourself. You are literally only looking out for yourself, for number one. So don't come here trying to say like, oh, you're so sorry. Absolutely not. You feel nothing. Anyways, we do see a happy ending when it comes to Oliver and Connor, because at the very end, when we see them at the funeral, they are together. They seem like they were able to make their relationship work whilst Connor was in prison, and ultimately thrived, which I'm happy to see. We love to see it because they're one of the best TV show LGBTQ couples out there, and I think that representation of their relationship has been stellar throughout this season, and I'm glad that they got their happy ending, even if they did go through the trials and tribulations that come with being on this show. But one couple who did not get a very happy ending, unfortunately, was Bonnie and Frank. Now, when it comes to the character of Frank, we were presented with many revelations. Now, this character has always been shrouded in mystery and secrecy. We never really knew where Frank came from. But this season, it was answered because apparently Sam had his own issues to deal with when it came to his past and it came to his mental health, because he ended up siring a child with his sister, right? Incest. Okay, and I don't know about you guys, it seems like everyone on the internet saw this coming, but I wasn't really on the internet whilst I was watching this series. Like, I was just kind of watching it on my own, and I was shocked. I knew that there was incest going on. That was pretty much alluded to throughout the final episodes, but when it came to Frank being the child, I was blown away. My mind was like, what? But that definitely messes him up. That blows his own mind, because afterwards he's just a wreck. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He just makes these irrational decisions, and he goes up to the lawyer, tries to get evidence for Annalise. Like, his focus throughout the trial at the very end of it is just to please Annalise, even though she tells him this cannot be your life goal. Like, this cannot be the reason why you go on, your raison d'etre, because you need to love yourself. You need to stop hating yourself for everything that you did. But it's so hard for him to do because he's just reflecting on the new context that he's been given here. Like, the fact that he killed Lila, who was pregnant with his half sibling. Like, that's huge. He's just losing it. And then he visits Gabriel, who's another half sibling, who he was about to kill in a previous episode. I mean, he ends up giving Gabriel a ton of money, like 77 grand, and he's just like, run. Leave now, because the man that you think is worth mourning over is not the man that you think he is whatsoever. He was a demon. He was literally the devil. Go, run away, Gabriel. I'm telling you this as your big brother. Run away. Because let's not forget, Sam died in season 1. And since his death, he has caused more anarchy from the grave, from 6 feet under, than he did whilst he was alive. And considering that he had a child with his sister, he was causing more than enough anarchy whilst he was alive to begin with. So the fact that he was doing more from the grave, I mean, I was surprised that Frank didn't end up telling Gabriel that he was his brother, but that would just be too much. That would be way too much. So I understand why they were just like, you know what, Gabriel just gets out of there and he lives his life, because that's the ending that he deserved. This poor guy has just been through it, man. He just wanted to find answers about his father, and he ended up in this whole conspiracy. He ended up dating the woman who killed his father in the first place. Like, he's been through a lot. So Gabriel deserves to just go. He took Frank's money and left, and I'm glad for him. But that's one of the very few moments of clarity that we get from the character of Frank, because at the very end he assassinates the governor in broad daylight, and he ends up dying in the process as well, which is super sad. Yeah, it was a bit of a cathartic ending to his character. Like, it made sense. I mean, at the end of the day, he's killed a lot of people. He's got skeletons in his oh boy. In fact, at one point I thought his family were like mafiosos, because he must have come from some sort of gangster background in my mind. So the fact that he ended up being Sam's son that's why it was so shocking to me. But anyways, I digress. He ends up dying, but then we see that he wasn't the only one who was hit, because Bonnie, who rushes to his side and is just so distraught, ended up being shot as well, and she ends up dying too. And then Annalise rushes over and she is just crushed. She is rocking back and forth in just a state of distress and anguish, and that whole scene is so emotional. But the whole time I was just like, but why did Bonnie have to die? Why her? No, I disagree with Bonnie's death. I think it would have been fine to have Frank die. Sad to see him go, but it makes sense. Bonnie to die though, after everything she's been through, for real, with her father, with her past, and just let her live. Like, why did we have to see her die as well? I disagree with that. I don't think it was necessary. I don't think it really added anything to the character in terms of her arc, because the best outcome that we could have gotten for her arc is for her to have a better future. Really, like, she is one character that just deserved to have a brighter future than them all, because she just been through so much in her life. I think killing her off kind of took away from the story of that character. But anyways, one character whose death I was completely rooting for was Nate. He had gotten so frustrating the past few seasons, like ever since he killed Bonnie's ex-boyfriend, the one who was going to propose to her. I couldn't with him, man. Like, I completely understand he was mourning the loss of his father. It was a very, very sad case, and that whole storyline was very tragic and very frustrating, and I get why he was so infuriated and why he hated on Annalise, even though, again, he was forgetting the role that he played himself in this entire thing, and the fact that he has, again, skeletons in his closet, so he should not be pointing fingers at someone who has no blood on her hands. But I digress. I was really annoyed with Nate, and I fully expected him to meet a horrible end at the end of this series, but actually he ended up getting the happy ending that I had predicted Bonnie would, because at the very last minute Nate is offered a ton of money by the FBI, $20 million, so that he can testify against Annalise and say whatever they want him to say, anything that it takes for her to end up exactly where they want, which is in a locked up cell with the key thrown out. But actually he turns on them, going completely off script and thereby forfeiting the 20 million that was offered to him, but ultimately doing the right thing and not lying about Annalise on the stand and not perjuring himself, which, by the way, these people have been perjuring themselves left, right and center. I don't know the law when it comes to the repercussions of that, but there must be some sort of consequences, right? Like, the governor was just sitting there lying through her teeth. And then of course you have Laurel's dad, who was doing the same thing. He was just happily lying. Like, are there any consequences to that? Or that he ends up dead anyways, and so does she, so I guess it doesn't matter. But anyways, Nate ended up doing the right thing, and that's what counts here. And he ends up getting the 20 mil anyways. We don't see how, but we can assume that he got the money because he starts up a foundation, like a legal charity foundation for the incarcerated, and he again paves the way forward for others to get justice in a way that his father could not, which is I think a very positive message and a very positive outcome for his character, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of his character throughout this series, especially after he committed murder. Are we forgetting about that? I just want to reiterate, he committed murder and so did Michaela, but they ended up having a happy ending. Make it make sense. And finally, let's address the elephant in the room, that is of course the return of Wes. Now, we saw at the beginning of this season that Wes would return somehow by the end of the final season of this show, and it was supposed to be this huge reveal and this huge plot twist, and everyone was speculating as to how the hell this would even happen. It turns out it's not Wes that we see at the end of season 6. It is in fact Christopher, all grown up and present for his mum's late friend's funeral. Listen, okay, this isn't my favourite. This was not my favourite outcome when it came to that whole plot twist and that thing that was teased throughout this final season. I think it was a bit of a cop-out. I think it was interesting that they gave Alfred Enoch an accent to work with. Like, it just sounded so off because I was expecting Wes's voice, but it wasn't him. It was Christopher, all grown up, even though he looks entirely different to the kid version of Christopher, and he looks the same skin color as his father and has the exact same features as he looks exactly like his father, even though he has a white mother. But anyway, it doesn't matter. This is a bit of Disney magic being sprinkled in because he happens to look exactly like his father, and we happen to see that he has pursued the same career as Annalise, which if I was his mum, okay, if I was Laurel, I would be like, no, Christopher, you can do whatever you want. Literally whatever you want apart from that. Like, please do not become Annalise. Are you kidding? After everything that they've gone through, for Christopher to go up to Laurel and say, Mum, I am now a law school professor. I'm going to be teaching kids how to get away with murder. No. Absolutely not. But anyways, we see that Christopher brings the whole story full circle, and he is teaching his students how to get away with murder. And we see Annalise at some point in time was present throughout that class, and she's just smiling on like, you're screwed. And I think it was a really fun ending, even if it was a bit cheesy and a little bit Disney-ish. But I don't love the fact that they dragged out this plot twist and this mystery of when Wes was going to be coming back and under what circumstances. We only have one episode to clear up exactly how he he manages to do this, and ultimately he's not there. It ends up being his son, who looks exactly like him. Like, that was a bit of a cop-out to me. But overall, I really enjoyed season 6 of How to Get Away with Murder. I think it was an excellent season because they were able to really focus on driving the story forward. There were very few filler episodes, especially towards the latter half of the season. It very much felt like every single moment was created to drive the story forward and get to that end point that would feel as satisfying as possible, at least with the episode length that they had. I do wish that the final episode would have been especially longer, like maybe like a double episode back to back. But other than that, I do think that they did a pretty good job of wrapping up all of those loose ends and tying up all of the story, especially throughout the seasons, not just focusing on this season alone, but trying to wrap up all those storylines from previous seasons. And I do think that the character arcs and the endings that they gave to each of these characters did feel fulfilling, even if I did disagree with a couple of them. But in terms of the final season that we got of this show, I'm going to be giving How to Get Away with Murder season 6 an 8 out of 10. And in terms of the series as a whole, I do think it has remained relatively consistent, but there have been seasons where the storylines just felt a bit recycled and it felt like the characters weren't really moving anywhere or progressing. And I can't really dismiss that, having seen the final season, which was much more focused. There were seasons in there that just felt a bit drab. So as a result, I'm going to knock it down slightly as a series as a whole, and I'm going to give How to Get Away with Murder a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on How to Get Away with Murder season 6 and the series as a whole, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the show down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch the videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!